there is a reality that exists beyond your comprehension, and it's right in front of you. You know, the reality that exists beyond your comprehension is your own immediate experience. You don't know what it is.
Listen, guys, if you haven't figured it out, we're going to have an incredible guest today. His name's Brad Warner, and it's basically what I've been researching on this dude, life of a punk rock Buddhist. I mean, seriously, you don't have this type of walking contradiction. He's an ordained Zen monk, right? Who wrote he used to write articles for the, and I think he's a co-producer or co-owner of the Suicide Girls. If you know who those gals are, I know Jesse does.
Yeah, they're my favorite.
But he's a Zen Buddhist, and
he also worked with companies to do monster
yeah,
movies and stuff.
Yeah, like the old Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
And so he kind of packed up things, went to Japan to teach kids how to speak English, right? And then things just started just unraveling, right? Or raveling, I should say. Because, to lose it, to gain it, Zen is all about that, right? So Zen, if I had to pick a religion that I don't, because I think once you start defining God, you lose its meaning, but or her meaning or its meaning. But I think but if I had to, if my personal beliefs are attracted to or resonate most with, I would have to say the more Tibetan Zen type, like
the Buddhists,
like David Carradine in Kung Fu. He's my hero. You sit down in the middle of chaos and you just figure out whether you're gonna kick butt or kiss somebody, right?
Right.
So that's where I go. But this is, I mean, it sounds like a punk rock Buddhist is kind of like a walking contradiction.
A little
bit. But I think, well, yeah, it does on the surface, right? But I think once you get to know this gentleman, and you will today, very much so, you'll probably see more consistency than ever before. That's just at least my take. We'll find out for sure. In the meantime, before I do a formal introduction to him, guys, listen, go to Spreaker.com. It's growing, isn't it, Jesse? Just popping it, yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, exponentially. And then we have, also you can get on Spreaker.com. Hey, Jesse, you got it, yeah. You got Spreaker.com. You could also get on Fringe FM as well as 99.1 FM. iHeartRadio. We're also on YouTube. And
we're on social media.
Facebook Live. We're Facebook Live right now. Get on there. You can make comments. If you're on Spreaker, make comments there. You can make comments on Facebook Live too, as well as the downloads later on. If you want to also we have our own app, UI Radio Network, I should say, on our App Store. Go to your App Store, Apple App Store, UI Radio Network. Get your app. You can listen to our show 24 hours, 7 days a week. Well, with that being said, let's get to the host here. Or I should say the guest here, who guests us with the mostest, right? All right, Brad Warner is an ordained Zen teacher and author of so many books. Some of the books are Sex, Sin, and Zen. Zen Wrapped Up in Karma, Dipped in Chocolate. Come on, one of my favorite shows, right? Sit Down and Shut Up. Hardcore Zen. I love that, Hardcore Zen. Also, Don't Be a Jerk, I think is another one of them, right? Come on, you can't make this up. It came beyond the Zen. That's one of his latest book. It came beyond the Zen, right? And it's just so many more. If you want to reach him, you go to hardcore zen info. .com, I believe. hardcorezeninfo.com. Hardcore.zeninfo.
No, hardcorezen.info.
Hardcorezen.info. I thought so. See that? Thank you, Jesse.
No problem.
So without further ado, let's get to the man of the hour here, Brad Warner. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Listen, you know who David Carradine is? I mean, or
yeah,
I
used to watch that show.
Come on, does that not just that woke me up? I just, it was just like the perfect mix. Like what you talk about, like you're almost like, to me, that type of a character, not like the character, but the kind of the message of the movie, because it was very tantalizing seeing this type of, I guess he was a Tibetan. I don't know what he was exactly, but was he Zen?
I think he was supposed to be Chinese. He was supposed to be a Chinese Zen monk.
Okay, there you go. Well, see, but here you had this tantalizing aspect of being in the West and shooting up and doing his thing. But you do the same thing. You start out as a punk rocker. I mean, and you've done so many things. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was the bass player for a hardcore punk band called Zero Defects, whose big hit was Drop the A-Bomb on Me, which is 18 seconds of Drop the A-Bomb on me.
No, to me, that is incredible, because you start out this way. I mean, I guess growing up in the 80s, I assume, right? 80s, 90s?
Yeah. So I graduated high school in '82, and then that's the year I joined Zero Defects.
Gotcha. Well, back then in the 80s, it was kind of a harsh memory for me. Not a harsh, but just a cloudy memory, I should say. You know, that's all my experimentation days. But it sounds like it might have been yours too, just from watching some of your videos, how you kind of woke up and, you know, and one of the conclusions I think, and I want to get this out now because, you know, I think this is advanced certain things, is you had your experiences with experimentation with drugs and different experiences and punk rock. And I'm not sure, and you could speak to it, if Zen or that philosophy was in your life then, or if it kind of gradually you kind of worked into it. But do you look at your times when you experimented, and I think you have a very healthy perspective on it now, where you don't need to have drugs to be in the present moment. In fact, it's probably more of a distraction of getting you out of the present moment. But did you have that? Do you have any regrets of your experiences back then when you were experimentation with those type of things?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it regrets. You know, you do what you do, and then that's what adds up to your life. And I don't really regret it. I'm probably glad I did it than regret it, because now I can speak to it. You know, there's a lot of people out there who are promoting this idea that using drugs, using psychedelics is going to be the way into a higher spiritual consciousness. And I don't think that's true. And having experienced it myself, I think it's a kind of it's a dead end. You know, it goes somewhere, and sometimes people can have a little bit of an insight doing those things, but I don't think it's certainly not a long-term useful thing. And the problem with the drugs now is you don't know what you're getting. So I would be very reluctant to even try it once these days, especially.
Yeah, you know, especially the heroin epidemic too. I mean, that just takes a couple times or one time, whatever they say, and boom, you're trying to crawl out of a deep hole.
Yeah, that's not really psychedelic though.
Well, but even still, but to his point, and I have to say, I agree wholeheartedly, is that, you know, to me, I think most people, and I think they rationalize, justify, and I know I did when I was younger, when I was having my fun in the sun there, was that, you know, you look at it's a distraction, and it's so easy to become a crutch where you use it for whatever excuses. But if you do it on a regular basis, what are you running away from? Is my question to people. We're always running away from ourselves, whether we're eating too much sex, too much work, too much whatever. It's just one more opportunity to distract from going within. I mean, is that your take at this point too?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's one of those things that I got into a little argument on Twitter, and now I'm just dropping Twitter entirely from my life. But with a guy who was claiming that he runs a Buddhist website, and now he's totally into the psychedelic thing. And what's interesting is all they get very defensive. You know, if I say, for example, in Buddhism, there's a precept against using intoxicants, and it's right there from the beginning. It was, as far as we know, invented by Buddha himself. It goes all the way back. So if you want to do Buddhist practice, you have to do it straight. That's one of the ways to define Buddhist practice. So I got into it with this guy and saying, well, you can do all the drugs you want. I can't stop you. But if you're calling it Buddhism, I have to say, no, that's not Buddhism. And it really got heated. You know, this guy got very defensive. I thought, you know, it was almost as if I was insulting him personally, you know, which I found interesting.
Right. Well, you know, and for that reason alone, I think people, like you say, will choose whatever road they go down. But just like on a logical level, it doesn't make sense to me that we have to have an altered altered experience to have a connection in this reality. It almost seems like it's contradictory to it. I know that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think if you really want to get into what life actually is, you have to get rid of as many of the things that get in the way of that as possible, or else you're not going to see it. We're talking about reality. We're not talking. People have this idea of enlightenment in Buddhism, and they imagine that enlightenment is some kind of special altered state of consciousness, and it really isn't. It's just noticing what the original state of consciousness you already have actually is.
Right. Well, you know, and I think when there's contradictions, like we were talking about in the beginning of the show, I think I look at contradictions from a more of a healthier perspective than perhaps maybe you or other people do. But how do you take the human contradiction, just of what we say and what we do?
Yeah, the human well, it's hard to know where to go with that, but the teacher who founded the form of Buddhism that I started is a guy named Dogen. And one of the most famous things about Dogen's pieces of writing that he left behind is that they're so contradictory. So it's really hard for people to follow him because he'll say one thing and then say something else and then contradict that too. And he's trying to kind of point to how reality actually is. You know, our minds can make reality into one thing, and that's just the way we organize it so that we can deal with it. But really, reality is contradictory, and we have to. It's better if you can kind of understand that and be comfortable with the contradictions of it.
And it's not easy for people, because especially if you're coming from life from a very black and white perspective, and holding contradiction that we're naturally, or I would say we're naturally contradictory people, and I'll tell you why in a second, and hear your thoughts on it. But
Okay.
like you said, holding that dissonance in your mind, that you are, the yin and the yang, you are whatever the case may be, and there's neither one's better or worse, or however a Buddhist would, and you could describe how a Buddhist would see that. Is not an easy challenge to do, because it seems like our ego wants to have one direction, right? But real quick here,
Yeah.
why I say that there's a human contradiction is that because I believe that you create your own reality, and everything's a mirror of yourself. So if you see something you hate about in somebody else, there's a part of you that you hate within yourself. If you see something you like about somebody else, how can you not be contradictory if that is a universal rule, law, or a belief that it occurs? Because you're always going to be looking at what you like and what you don't like within yourself, right?
Yeah, that's true, and that's real important to realize. I think that all of the things that you think are problematic in the outside world are things that you contain within yourself, and that I think, boy, I think America needs to kind of wake up to that too as a whole, because we're really getting into this bizarre state where we don't understand that all the objects that we hate outside ourselves are nothing but reflections of who we are. That's the thing to work on.
Yeah, good luck with that one, Brad. But but I agree. I think that's where it's a great place to start. And it seems like Zen and Buddhism actually brings you there quicker than perhaps other religions, from your perspective.
Well, yeah, quicker is a kind of Zen is a slow process, so it's not one of these kind of get enlightenment quick things. It takes time, but the idea is that what you're unraveling is a million years of conditioning of the entire human race, and we absorb that as soon as we're born. We start absorbing that conditioning. So the Zen practice works on not exactly dismantling that conditioning, but understanding it for what it is, so that you can allow it to be in its space and then be free to work outside of the conditioning that you have. And it takes years to get into this. I'm very distrustful of meditation systems that promise you something quickly, though, because I think all you can get quickly is a kind of an illusion of I don't know, some kind of experience, but nothing very valuable.
So your take is more so the daily practice, the cumulative effect, more so than you're going to have this orgasmic experience that's going to change your life forever and put you on this ayahuasca road of discovery, right? So,
Yeah.
so have you always had that conclusion, or were you chasing the dragon and then wanted to then to have that experience and realize, well, hold on, did you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I started right out of high school doing this, and it was kind of a weird thing in that I wasn't looking for Zen Buddhism. I just kind of stumbled across it because I was a freshman at Kent State University and signed up for a class called Zen Buddhism, and it really changed my life. But when you're 18 or 19 years old or in your early 20s, you're impatient, and that's what led to using acid and doing some of these other things. But I had a good teacher who said, well, you're not, just kind of what I just said right now, that you're going to get you can get an experience really fast, but whether that experience is valuable or not is the question. You get my argument with the whole ayahuasca or drugs or psychedelic thing is it throws you into something without any context. So so you may actually have some sort of realization or some, some kind of deep understanding, or maybe not understanding, but something beyond what you normally experience, but you don't have any grounding to understand that. So it's like you get thrown over there and then pulled back and go, oh, I don't know what just happened, but it was really cool. And, and I don't know how valuable that is ultimately.
Well, listen, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think some people just need to go down that road to have that experience. I don't think you could talk them out of it or talk them into it. It's just going to have to allow them to have their own journey, right? But with you, as you know, at a young age, I don't say exposed, but but actually bringing Zen into your life and understanding the philosophy, I'm sure it's been a journey yourself, understanding, because it is. I don't think you could ever really fully understand any religion, honestly. I don't know if you're supposed to. I think some people who do spout say that they're right. How does Zen handle that? How does a Zen master handle other religions that say, hey, listen, you're wrong and we're right?
I basically just ignore them. I don't know. The interesting thing about Zen is that there's no doctrine, there's no dogma. And I think that's a really, really key part of it. Nobody tells you what to believe. I mean, there might be some people under the heading of Zen who do that, but I think they're mistaken. The general rule of Zen is you don't try to form the person you're dealing with, their experience. You just you say, here's the practice, here's what we do, and I can say, here's what I got out of it, but that doesn't mean my take on it is the correct one, or even Dogen's or Buddha's take is the correct one. It's the correct one for them, but your mileage may vary, as they say on the commercials. Your experience is going to be different from anyone else's. And yet there's a commonality, and finding that commonality is really interesting, because you find that people are very, very much alike in ways I never would have guessed.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It almost sounds like I'm trying to see a world with everybody with Zen, right? It seems like it'd be a lot of indecisiveness going on. Should we make that bomb or should we not? No, tell me, like, what? I joke, but describe a world of Zen. I mean, where do you think, what would we be looking like right now?
It's really hard to say, because that's something I've thought about. The Zen stream is very minor. People say Zen all the time, and I'm making a little collection lately of Zen. Somebody had Zen and tonic, this kind of alcoholic drink.
That's
somebody sent a picture.
You just imagine the alcohol in the.
Boy, see, now you pervert religions, right? Zen's on the perversion road too. Watch out. Go ahead.
But people talk about Zen a lot, but people who practice Zen there's really just a small minority. So I don't know what would happen in a world where people were more Zen, or were more realistic, I suppose. I think we're getting there, though. That's the thing that I find is interesting. We're going slowly, and there's always going to be setbacks, but I think we are getting to a realistic point of view as a kind of consensus point of view, although right now it seems to be fracturing badly. But I think it'll come back. And I don't know. I think that would be a world where you wouldn't have any reason, for example, to have a war, because you would understand that we are all basically the same. And it's not this kind of lovey-dovey hippie sort of understanding. You understand that your capacity for violence is the same as anybody else's, and your capacity for territoriality is the same as anybody else's. Me and Kim Jong-un, are basically just as territorial as each other. But if we understand that and can see eye to eye, you can go, okay, well, I have to be content with this territory being mine, and you have to be content with that one. It's not that hard once you start to understand it.
So by the nature of introspection, you think there would be less chaos in the world because people are more so looking at themselves and their behavior, and then looking at others' behavior from that perspective, that mirror?
Yeah. Yeah, and when you can see how stupid we all are, there becomes less of an impetus to try to impose your stupidity on somebody else. That's the way I look at it.
My stupid is better than yours.
Yeah. I mean,
The
that's what I
stupid
see when I
wars.
look at the news. I just see, stupid people trying to out-stupid each other, and it's like, well, why bother?
Why get in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
So, no, I think that's really fascinating because, I break things down by energy, and I'm curious, and I'll ask a follow-up question after I say this about
Hmm.
the role of science with Zen, is I see things as frequencies, I don't literally, but in my intellectual mind, I see life as frequencies and vibrations, and that we're all energetic, because we can't just see what we seem solid and physical, but just by science, I know that we're all made of energy, right? Everything's energetic. And I try to make decisions based on that too in my life. And it's not easy because, you're looking at something that's very, very invisible, but yet some people are, whether through awakening or going within themselves, meditation, Zen moments, they're expanding their five senses to more of a multi-sensory being, right? So where does science now at this point, is it catching up to Zen, or Zen catching up to science? I mean, do you even utilize science? Is it even important in Zen?
I think science is interesting, and I think it is important. And the Dalai Lama, who's not a Zen guy, but he is a Buddhist, said something like, "If we find anything in science that contradicts the teachings of Buddhism, we should defer to science." And I think that's a good attitude. That's kind of what I believe as well. And the lucky thing is Zen really tries to stay away from speculative stuff. Like, we don't talk about the origin of the universe or the nature of God and things like that, because we realize it's just speculative. You can talk about it if you want, but you're not really going to get anywhere with that, except a kind of fun conversation. So yeah, science is fine. And one of the things that attracted me to Zen in the very first place, when I was 18 or 19, was that I had been looking at religions, and I always found that every religion I looked at was terrified of science. I grew up in rural Ohio, so I'm going to run into a lot of this. But they hated evolution, and they hated all this other stuff. Uh, then I kind of found the Hare Krishna movement, and I thought, well, maybe these guys have it. And then I found out they were just as terrified of science as anybody else. So I really liked the fact that my first Buddhist teacher was like okay with evolution and science and everything else, because what it's what you can discover through the senses. That's basically what science is, and and that's worthwhile to discover. Why not? Why reject that and place something else ahead of it? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, interesting, because it seems like, and maybe you could share a couple of quotes from some Zen masters of the contradiction, or the kind of encapsulates what Zen is, which is
Duality, I
the
would say.
duality. Yeah, but it's so hard because you can't even do that. It's like a religion, or it's a belief you really can't explain because there's nothing to explain. But
Right.
but it seems like that if they're not willing to define that level, then how can they even go towards this multi-sensory being of angels and higher power and fallen angels, or things that people are clarifying around the world right now, and science catching up to a certain degree of measuring, right? Yeah, we may need a new stick, maybe not the scientific method anymore, but to get into get past the five sensory being into the multi-sensory, you need a new scientific method to try to understand it. But I mean, you have paranormal, you have a whole bunch of different measuring sticks now on electromagnetic level that are measuring energy and measuring these other things to a certain degree, and we're getting there. Zen wouldn't even go there, would they?
No, I mean, the tendency is not to go into anything speculative.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had excuse me, when I was younger, I had certain experiences that were weird, might be called psychic experiences and whatnot, that kind of drove me towards this path of trying to figure out what the hell this place I was living in actually was, because it didn't seem to be, my experience didn't seem to match what other people were telling me the world was. And the interesting thing about Zen is they'll allow all of that to be. If you have an experience that you think of as paranormal. Well, that's the experience you had without trying to explain it. Because I think the explanation, I mean, if you have enough information to form a good explanation, then you should do it. I really think that's true. But there are certain things where you're just kind of like, I don't know what the hell happened, but I have this experience, and I'm just gonna have it and gonna leave it where it is, but without speculating too much about it, because what we're after is something more like, how do we deal with the experiences that we do have, rather than trying to kind of sort out a cosmology to make sense out of them.
Wow, it must be you have to have a strong discipline, because I think there's a human drive to try to define a reality, and it's so easy, not easy, but it seems like there's I don't know if it's an internal or if it's an ego thing, and maybe you could speak to this, to want to define our reality when we haven't experienced, and go past and speculate, and to think why to have this and put meaning to it, and add on there. And it seems like to really not go there, you have to be very disciplined. I mean, is that part of the becoming an ordained monk, that, up, stop, Brad?
Being disciplined?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe
mentally,
so. I
mentally,
don't know.
mentally, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, it's a kind of a discipline, I suppose. And I've had people tell me I'm very disciplined, but if you looked at my apartment, if you see the rest of it, you might think otherwise. I'm kind of messy.
In that frame, you're very disciplined, it looks like.
Yeah, it looks really nice here, but if I moved my laptop around, it would be terrible. But I think it's just kind of a way of approaching it. There's one thing I wrote about in one of my books. I think it's in the There Is No God and He Is Always With You, but I'm not sure. But I had this experience where there was a monk I knew, an American guy, at a place called Tassajara, which is a monastery in Northern California, and he was a real nice guy, and I liked him a lot, and he committed suicide. It was a terrible thing. About a month after that happened, I was in Tassajara where he lived, and I had this weird experience where I felt, his name was David, and I felt like David was right next to me, in a very visceral sense, in an undeniable sense.
Sure.
Now, I don't believe in ghosts, and I'm skeptical about the afterlife and all of that. I find it's one of those things you can talk about forever and not get anywhere. But I know I had the experience of encountering David Cody a month after David Cody had died. So what do I do with that? Well, I just kind of accept it. I think, wow, that's neat. But if I were to speculate on the mechanism by which something like that could happen, I could spin out stories for days and days, but I don't know if any of them would help anything. You know what I mean? That's the...
No, yeah, I see your point, and I get that belief system. But the only thing, like, I would say from my perspective is, if I create my reality, I collapse the wave into a mirror here, double slit experiment, all that jazz here, and I create wherever my focus goes, my thoughts go, my experience goes, right? That's what I experience. So if you wanted to dwell cognitively or emotionally on this experience again with David, would you think that if you do create your reality, if that's part of the Zen belief, you would experience that again, or something similar to that?
I'm not sure. I haven't really tried. I'm kind of open to a lot of things, and I think we have to. I think we have to be a little careful how fast we go with certain experiences, and in that if you go too fast, the experiences become very confusing and frightening and weird, and you don't know what to do with them, and so I'm kind of content to go towards this in the speed that it wants to go, and not really push it. I mean, as far as how to define what I am, that's an interesting idea about energy, because that seems to be borne out in science, that matter is energy, and so we are beings of energy as much as we are beings of matter, and I feel like there is an interconnectedness of all of this, that for example, the phenomena we call consciousness, which might not even be a good name for it, but I think I
think it is.
It isn't something that I originate, though. I don't generate consciousness through me, and I think consciousness is something that's that is an element of the universe, that is just something, that's there, and we partake of it in a kind of a special way as human beings. That sort of thing makes sense. Now I'm getting into my own speculative
Well,
stuff.
but see, that's where I think the human drive to define, because a lot of the Zen and people that I meet who are exactly what you say, because you try to stay, you have to discipline yourself not to not to get into the speculative part, because it does, you're defining, and what if you create your own reality, whatever you define is what you'll experience. So does it really matter that that we're on a collective conscious level, as you say, we're all experiencing the same thing? If one person just chooses to experience something else, then it would change that whole situation around if you believe that process. So why go there to speculate? And I see that point. I think that's probably the ultimate view to have. But at the same time, it seems like, and I don't know how to even explain it, because I do love Zen. I love Buddhism probably more than any other organized religion, is that you may be missing out on creating different experiences, repeating different experiences, since you're kind of holding yourself back from going there again, or trying to understand it, or trying to define it more.
I don't know if I'm really holding myself back. I'm just kind of allowing whatever experience I have to be. The the idea is that in this moment you are experiencing this moment, and however it appears to you is how it appears to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the way it is on some kind of ultimate level, but it's a kind of appearance. And you deal with the things in the way they come to you. So if you see yourself as a human being living in Los Angeles on a street with a tree in front of you, then that's the experience you're having. And there's also this idea that of going beyond words and phrases. This is something that is an old Buddhist saying, that we have words to describe things, and we use them so that we can talk to each other. Like I'm talking to you right now. If I want to say move the microphone, you know what I'm saying, something like that. But those words aren't really the things. The microphone is not a microphone. There's all these sort of weird Buddhist phrases like that when you first encounter them, you're like, what the hell are you talking about? But it's trying to point out that there is a reality that exists beyond your comprehension, and it's right in front of you. The reality that exists beyond your comprehension is your own immediate experience. You don't know what it is, but you deal with it, and you try to deal with it as best you can.
See, I see it, and this is why I'm attracted to it, is I see it's more closer to quantum physics experience Zen is, more so than perhaps other ones, because of what you just said in that sense. I still have a lot to learn and more to experience on that, but I just think it's brilliant, a lot of the sayings they have, and not putting a label to identification of this microphone, because like you said, who knows what it really is? It's this, and once I start describing it, I'm losing its probably meaning, right? So, but it's tough to live that life as a human being when there's a drive to want to label, and drive to want to speculate, a drive to want to, and so through one of the best ways, and before we go on break here, one of the best ways to help maybe not speculate is the practice of meditation.
Yeah, that's the idea. You do this. The Zazen practice as a non-goal directed meditation. So you're not trying to make anything particular happen. You're just trying to sit in the real experience of just sitting. And that's harder than it sounds. You'd think that would be the easiest thing in the world. But if you actually try to do it, you try to fully integrate yourself into the most simple experience that you can come up with, which is sitting still and looking at a wall. That's what we do. It becomes this bizarre journey into the unknown. Just the simple act of sitting still, which is that's why it's interesting and boring at the same time.
Right, interesting and boring that you're collapsing time and space, right? No, I find it fascinating, Brad. And we're going to go on a break. When we get back, you mentioned a few things about, you don't know what you believe about death or whatever the case may be and experiences. But let's talk a little about, if you're even familiar with it, the Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Are you a little bit familiar with that at all?
I know what it is, yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that because they seem to define and speculate a lot in that.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll be right back with Brad Warner. You can catch him at our hardcorezen.info. Also, he's author of so many books. It came from Beyond the Zen, one of the latest ones. Check it out. Incredible information. Brilliant, brilliant man. We'll ask him what his IQ is when we get back, all right? We'll be right back with Brad Warner. All right, we are back with Brad Warner from hardcorezen.info. Check him out. He's all around the world. He does the retreats and does events all around the world. And I guess you do a lot here in America. It's just America wants to keep the man down, doesn't he? Doesn't America? Maybe. I know, right? So, but yeah, we'll get into that. I want to talk about what you do in these other countries because you travel all over. Look at your event. You're a busy man up until holidays here.
Yeah, it was all over.
I know. You look forward to that room with staring at the wall, I bet, after that period of run, huh?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of tough. People see me. I was talking to a neighbor about, oh yeah, I'm going to Europe for a month, and she's going, oh, that's great. And I'm going, well, I'm gonna be working the entire month, so I'm not gonna be like climbing the Eiffel Tower or anything like that.
Yeah, you're gonna have to listen to people. Talk about a challenge for me, right? But no, it's I get it. And when we talk about the Book of the Dead, we're talking about death and all that. And later on, I wanted to get into and. Do you have to have a hard stop? We can hold you over just for a little bit if we get into spiritual activism.
Sure.
All right, great. So let's talk about the Book of the Dead because and that's Tibetan, which is a type of Buddhist Zen. I mean, how do you describe that?
Well, it's a type of Buddhism. Zen is a slightly different thing, and the Book of the Dead is. There are books within the Zen tradition that are similar to it and kind of say similar things. However, the Zen tradition sort of kind of leaves those things to the side. Occasionally, you'll find references to those ideas, but they're not taught as like, here's what you should learn about what happens after you die. They're just sort of like, here's the information that we have that somebody wrote about what happens after you die, and if you want to read it, that's fine.
It's like this is what their experience was. Doesn't mean that's going to be your experience, right?
Yeah, and there's this idea. I put in let's see, what was the book? Don't Be a Jerk.
Yeah.
The
great
book I wrote just before the latest one. I wrote a chapter. It's about Dogen and his philosophy, and I wrote a chapter called "Did Dogen Believe in Reincarnation, and Does It Matter if He Did?" And there's a piece in one of Dogen's writings where he talks about when you die, you spend 7 days in the one realm and 7 days in the other realm, and then you have this body and an eye that can see the universe. And he says a bunch of these things. And the interesting bit for me is, even though he's saying this, he's using it as an illustration of something else. What he's saying is that what they call the three treasures in Buddhism, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, are the most important things in the world, and that even after you die and spend 7 days in this realm and 7 days in the other realm, you should keep repeating the chant to praise Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And even as you're being born into the next life, you should keep repeating that chant. So his point is about revering Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and not so much about what happens to you after you die. And so it's an interesting thing. I have my own speculations on what might occur, but I don't know. I feel like the life we live now is part of a larger continuum, but I also feel that it's a bit of a mistake to talk in terms of life after death because I don't think I live after my death. I think there is, on the other end, I think there's something that can be called I that does live after my death. So it gets weird.
Yeah, well, like near-death experiences. We've had Daniel Brinkley. We have had a lot of people who are well-known who had near-death experiences, and there is a common denominator that if you could pull the Dr. Raymond Moody, shares a lot of that. I think he wrote a book called Life After Life, and there are common denominators that people will see, and even books like what's his name? Many Lives, Many Masters. Yeah. The doctor can't remember his first name. Anyway, it'll come to me. He's found consistent uh, stories of and healing processes of past lives and what they experienced. So I mean, there are, and is that coincidences from a Zen perspective, or is there some, because you don't want to speculate, but how would somebody Zen process that?
I mean, I think there could be something to it. I I don't know. And there's an old Zen story about the guy comes up to a Zen master and says, "What happens to us after we die?" Zen master says, "I don't know." And the guy says, "Well, you're supposed to be a Zen master. What do you mean you don't know?" And the Zen master says, "I'm not a dead Zen master." So
Oh yeah.
See, that's the brilliance in it, because it could be, to me, it could be very frustrating for the very curious person, but at the same time, it's brilliant because there's a circle. There's no, you can't, how do you deny that? He's not as, how does he know? I mean, outside of having maybe a near-death experience, that was his experience. Could somebody have the same experience again? I mean, there are some common denominators, but who really knows until you're doing it, right? But anyway, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating philosophy and belief system. Is there anything right now in your belief system that you feel would be consistent to the day you die, or is everything up for grabs since you're a Zen master?
well, consistent to the day I die, I suppose would be a kind of a commitment to ethics. Now, this I think is a lot of times when people write about Zen, they'll downplay that, or they'll say that Zen doesn't have an ethical system, and it doesn't have systematized ethics. It doesn't have like a list of rules you must adhere to, but it does have this idea that in any situation you encounter, there is an ethical way to proceed and a million unethical ways to proceed, and that your duty is to try to steer towards the ethical course. And that's something I think I'll carry. I don't know that I am the most exemplary example of steering an ethical course, but I do believe that it's really, really important to do so, because I think that's how the universe eventually comes together by us. The reason I wrote this book called Don't Be a Jerk is because Dogen says that the essence of Buddhist philosophy is showaku makusa is the Japanese phrase. It means doing the right thing. And I read that and I thought, well, another way, a contemporary way of saying that would be don't be a jerk. Just if you in a situation and you have a choice of the jerk behavior or the non-jerk behavior, choose the non-jerk behavior, because eventually that will also make you happier. We have this idea that we can screw over the other guy and get something for ourselves, and in the short term that might be true, but long term it never works. So your best course of action is always the ethical course of action, even in a selfish way.
So, listen, brilliant. Do you think it in the long run doesn't work because of karma, or do you think in the long run it work because of karma and the fact that we're perhaps interconnected with each other?
Yeah, I mean, karma and interconnection run hand in hand. So it's the way I think of it. It would be like slapping your own face or something. Your interconnectedness is so deep that anything you do to another person is on some level exactly the same as doing that to yourself. So you have to be careful, because this kind of big self extends throughout the universe, and it's in everything that you encounter. So your best bet is to always treat people fairly and kindly, which doesn't always mean being a nice guy in the normal sense. I mean, sometimes you have to take a stand, and sometimes you have to be a little harsh with people. That happens.
If you want the pretty girls, yeah, go ahead.
You want the suicide girls.
I'm kidding.
I could get in trouble.
No, go ahead. That was brilliant, though. Go ahead.
But no, I just think that's the way it goes, and
Yeah.
and you have to kind of. It's one of the things that's sort of. It happens in the realm of sort of Zen and spirituality in general, where people think that the best thing to do is be this kind of meek, mild, milquetoast sort of person. But I don't think that's the way to be good, to be ethical either. You most of the time, your best bet is to get out of somebody else's way and let them do what they want. But there are times when you have to step in and take a stand and defend somebody or defend yourself and all that.
Right.
But it's a more rational. It's not this sort of hippy dippy, be kind to all living creatures things, but it is. That's another one of these contradictions. Be kind to all living creatures, but maybe not in the way that you think kindness should look. Sometimes kindness looks different.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the old coach saying, I treat all my team members the same, but I treat them all differently, meaning that wherever they are in their prospective career or event, he would treat everybody at that level. But if they're not at that point, he would treat them differently, So,
Yeah.
but he would treat them all the same. So it is kind of a contradiction in itself. But that's what's beautiful about Zen is it is very contradictory, but yet it makes complete sense.
Yeah, like I said, that duality, man.
Honestly, it's so attractive when people have a chance to really learn about it. And I hate that it's not, well, it's picking up more, but I agree. I think we probably would have a better world if it was more people had more Zen mentality and didn't feel like we knew all the answers all the time, right? So I want to get into spiritual activism, which is a good lead into what you're just talking about, but I do want to ask one of the questions on the spiritual level piece of Zen. A lot of in traditional religions, let's say Christianity, Islam, other denominations. I can't even keep up with them.
Pastafarianism.
What's the one?
They're a good one.
What's the one when they breathe air? What are they called?
Breatharians.
Breatharians.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, it's just so many different dogmatic beliefs in there, and it seems like Zen stays away from that type of dogma, and it's almost self. Perpetuating because you're not speculating, right? And it seems to be in a safe place. What is there a part of life experiences, like for example, coming from like even in the metaphysical world, they say there's a higher self. There's your soul, and then there's a higher soul or a higher self or it or God, whatever God, goddess, soul there is, or whatever connection. What's the Zen perspective on that, if there is one?
Well, that's actually is a good plug because I happen to cover that in the new book. It came from Beyond Zen, but there's an essay that Dogen writes, which I think is brilliant, where he uses a word, a Chinese word. He was Japanese, but he knew Chinese, so he used Chinese words sometimes, and it just means it. And if you read the essay where he is describing it, this kind of vague term that he uses, he's talking about what a lot of people in mystical traditions, Christian mysticism or Islamic mysticism, Sufism, that kind of thing, they use the word God to describe it, but Buddhism doesn't really use the word God very often, so he uses this word it. So he says there is a kind of ultimate something which is in many ways identical to you at this moment, but it is also something much bigger than you. And he says weird things like, we are the eyes and ears. No, we are the tools it uses to experience itself. That's how he describes human life in that passage. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It seems like there's an open door there, but if you go further in it, then you're probably going to lose the meaning of it, right?
Well, yeah, you could speculate about it and you could get into weird ideas about it, but I don't know if that's necessary. I think it expresses itself, or God expresses him, her, themselves, however you prefer, in the way that it does. So you have this experience, and even your mundane experience. I was eating some cereal a few minutes ago. My mundane experience of eating cereal is also God's experience of eating cereal. So, and what that is, I don't know. I mean, I know that I poured it out of the box and put the almond milk on top of it and ate it, but that's just a description. I ultimately don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because
something weird.
Yeah, no, to me it makes sense. Like it's not on a quantum so much. It is on a quantum level, but more so that our spirit is experiencing this human experience here, and it perhaps can't have this three-dimensional experience if it wasn't through the human experience, right? And to feel the senses, to know what it feels like to touch something hard, or to taste the milk and the cereal in your mouth and have that taste bud experience. I mean, that may be all there is of the spiritual experience at that point, right? But we're going to go on break here in a second. But one quick question is in Buddhism, in Zen, Is there anything, because you weren't the original guy or group of people who came up with this. This is something that you learned throughout the time, or maybe you were in past life. Who knows? Could be talking to Buddha right here. And
I doubt it,
but and as we grow, like my beliefs always change, and I say, I tell people all the time, my beliefs probably what they are today will be different in 5 years from now, or at least some of the beliefs, right? And I'm definitely not the person I was 5 years earlier. So I just see that kind of that consistency of inconsistency is part of the growth in life. But is there something in Zen that you feel that you would tweak, change, or they missed that at this point of your journey from your perspective? And I know it's being speculative, but you're putting you on the spot. You're going to have to tell us, Brad. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'd put it in terms of something I would change. One thing I like about the Zen tradition is it's very flexible and can be changed. One of the ways my teacher used to describe, people would say, well, what was Buddha? Because he never claimed to be a god or anything. And my teacher used to say, Buddha was a kind of genius, and I think that's a good way to look at it. He's sort of like the Einstein of spirituality, if you want to put Einstein on that kind of pedestal, in that he came up with something brilliant and shared it with the world. But it doesn't mean that that brilliant something has to stay fixed forever. It would be like, a good analogy would be like if you just said science or physics stops with Einstein's discoveries, and Einstein's discoveries are sacred and can never be changed. Well, that's not the way to do physics, because you always have to be able to challenge it. And I think Buddhism takes the same attitude towards the teachings of Buddha, or at least the Zen stream of Buddhism does, in which you say, well, Buddha said that, but is that correct? We have to test it for ourselves to see if it's correct. The nice thing is that generations of people have tested it, and they've found most of it to be reliable, although it does change. The Zen philosophy has changed over time, and there's a lot of things that have been dropped and a lot of things that have been added. Different cultures have contributed different things to it. So I don't think there's anything I would change, because it's already so changeable. I don't think my Zen experience is the ultimate Zen experience, but I don't think Buddha's Zen experience was the ultimate Zen experience either. It's one of a continuum of countless experiences that can be had, and that all connect up to some ultimate something which we as individuals probably will never understand.
Well,
but we. Yeah.
No, well, listen, that's fascinating, because in most other religions, I could look at like the Hindu caste system. I could say, well, that seems, I changed that up. Seems to kind of limit certain people. In Christianity, where Jesus didn't come here to create a religion. You created all these religions, right? And so many things are misinterpreted. I would change a few things there. And it's just, but it's fascinating in the Zen philosophy, Zen belief system, that it has this self, this self-perpetual changing adaptive formula in there. I don't know.
Yeah, it's this weird thing, because it's both. It's not exactly an anything goes philosophy, because there is certain kind of constraints on things, but it's not. It's also not. It's also very open to other things. I mean, there are certain things that have kind of traveled through the realm of Zen that are problematic. I mean, this kind of reverence for the teacher. I mean, I think you have to revere your teachers, but you have to not put them on a pedestal too, and it's a sort of balance. So there are certain things in the tradition that I'm not real happy with. I don't like wearing the robes, for example. I put them on sometimes because
as we can tell.
Yeah, I've got an Ultraman. That's what the company I worked for made, was Ultraman.
Hey, I think there's a scripture in Zen that says that Ultraman is the path.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but but it's interesting. It's fascinating, because there are, like you said, not contradictions, but constraints, and and it sounds like it's more of a personal a belief, not personal belief, but a personal choice, than it is more so that fundamental problem with that religion or that belief. And you even call it a religion? You call Zen a religion? Is it called that? And I guess in the history books it is.
Yeah, in the history books it is, and I sometimes defer to that, but I don't think of it as a religion, because I don't think
it's a philosophy. I see it more as.
Yeah, you can't really have a religion that doesn't have a belief system. I don't see how that seems to me to be the crux of the point. But there are you know, as I said about wearing the robes, there are ceremonial things that are traditions within Zen, and I've learned to do those, but I think they're secondary. I think you could toss them away and you'd still have Zen. They happen to be kind of helpful for people in other ways, but I don't think they're necessary to the practice.
Sure, you know.
That's
No, yeah, listen, I agree with you. I don't think that they're necessary, but it's just a great way of looking at it. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we get back, let's let people know we putting Zen into action. Let's see what Zen looks like in spiritual activism, and and I'll throw some things at you, and we'll see kind of how a Zen would handle it. All right. So
okay.
we'll be right back with, my God, there's so much great stuff with Brad Warner, and we're talking about Zen, getting our Zen on, and his latest book came Beyond the Zen. So check him out at hardcorezen.info. Right back with Brad Warner. All right, as promised, we are back from a quick break, and we're talking to Brad Warner. He's author of so many different books. His latest book is It Came Beyond the Zen, also Hardcore Zen. You know, Don't Be a Jerk, Sex, Sin, and Zen. I mean, you know, some of the other topics we talked about, and I hate that we just get lost just in the philosophy of it all. But to me, it's fascinating.
We'll bring him back.
Yeah, you'll have to come back, Brad. All right.
Sure.
All right. So let's talk about spiritual activism, because I think there's a reason we get distracted so often. We get distracted with drugs. We get distracted with sex, with television, technology. I mean, I go through the whole list, right? Pharmaceutical drugs, whatever it may be. Because it looks like we feel like we're this human being looking for a spiritual experience. Perhaps we're not realizing, in my belief, my dogmatic belief, is that we're a spiritual being having a human experience. So it seems like we're always denying our reality here. Whether I call it, even when people think positive all the time, I call it denial-based positive thinking, where they don't want to think anything negative, because I don't want to track that through fear. They don't want to track that, right? So they're denying that base, and so I think that's an issue there. So it seems like this fear-love experience, and I'm curious how Zen balances that, especially when it comes to activism and getting involved in our reality, because that's what we're here for. If you don't want to define, you don't want to speculate where you came from, where you're going, because it's speculation, then you have no choice but to focus on what's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
All right, so
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff about engaged Buddhism, which is this kind of activist Buddhism. I don't know if I consider myself any sort of an activist. I think what comes into your realm is where you need to focus your activism. I think people get a little distracted by big issues and think, well, it's my duty to save the starving people in Zimbabwe. But maybe that's not your real experience. Maybe your real experience is your little brother who's having a conniption fit over the Cheerios, you know, and maybe that's where your activism needs to take place. So anything that you do is a form of spiritual activism, I think.
Huh, interesting. All right, so if I was said, question every official narrative, would the Zen approve of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always do, especially really popular narratives, and I question the unofficial narratives too. I'm always doubting what I hear, and I find it fascinating that other people don't. That's the part that baffles me. It's like these narratives have been wrong so many times and proven wrong. What makes you think that the one you're hearing today is any less wrong than the one people were hearing 50 years ago that we now know to have been wrong? I don't. Yeah.
Explore the rabbit hole and its multiple tunnels of truth.
Whoa. Yeah, I guess I feel like my life is kind of like that. You're just kind of going through something that you don't quite understand, but it's leading you in places. I find the best thing to do about life is just kind of accept where you are led and see what happens there, which is, doesn't mean I'm sort of laissez-faire. I mean, I try to do things, but I often find that the failures I have are beneficial. And so I don't really worry too much. I mean, at the moment that I fail at something, I'll probably feel bad. But then if I can kind of take a step back, I can go, okay, well, that didn't work. That shows me something.
Right.
The fact that it didn't work.
Right. No, brilliant. Okay, ready? Spend as much time in nature as possible. Is that a Zen belief?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's an interesting one for me personally, because I grew up in a kind of a rural place. I mean, it's kind of somewhere between rural and suburban if you kind of looked at the town where I grew up in. And I always wanted to be in a big city. And basically, ever since I got out of high school, I've lived in big cities. So I'm real happy in a place like Los Angeles where I live, or Chicago and New York and Tokyo where I've also lived. I think you can find something anywhere that will speak to you of the truth, but it does tend to be more difficult to directly experience that in an urban setting because you've got people there, and the people are all putting their kind of stink on the thing that you want to
Figuratively and
encounter.
literally. Yeah, no, absolutely. I love your. Don't you love his mind?
Yeah.
What is your IQ? I'm sure it's off the chart. What is it?
I have no idea, actually. You mentioned that before we went to the break, but I've never, if it's ever been tested, I have no idea. I assume I'm pretty dumb because I was like a C student in school.
Oh, that
You know.
means nothing, man. That means nothing when it
Well,
comes to
the IQ. It's funny. The history of the IQ quotient was actually meant for children to see if they could learn French. And
I
then,
did learn a little bit of French when I was a kid, though.
oh, yeah, so your IQ must be like 200 or something.
It must be, yeah.
All right. So another spiritual activist belief, I would say, is from a Buddhist or Zen, would be ensure love, not fear, is your default response.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's the word love is interesting to me from a Zen perspective because you don't hear the word love a lot from Zen teachers.
Yeah.
My first teacher used it a lot. He was an American guy and he'd grown up kind of Irish Catholic. I think his parents were both Irish immigrants. And so he understood how to integrate that word love into a Zen context. But we don't, more we talk about compassion, and compassion and love, I think, are related intimately. Your compassionate action is actually a loving action, but not a loving action that's like, oh, I love you kind of thing. It's more like I'm going to do the right thing for you.
Right.
Fear is a difficult one because, fear is sometimes
Necessary.
useful, yeah, useful and necessary. But that's a different kind of fear. The fear that you feel when you're being confronted by a charging rhinoceros or something is a little different from that sort of existential fear of what people might think of me, that sort of thing. So the first kind of fear is something that you accept and use, for the way it needs to be used. The second is one that it's good to learn to be able to put it aside, to not really try to make it stop, but to go, okay, there's fear of that, but I'm going to do this thing anyway.
So courage.
Yeah.
I guess that's courage.
No, I think that's Eckhart Tolle talks about psychological fear and clock fear. So expose, and disconnect from the dysfunctions of the systems.
Yeah, I think we got to do that. I mean, the system.
Now, expose is throwing judgment, isn't it?
I guess it is. Yeah, I try to disconnect from it. Expose it is sort of, I think always pointing it out is the best you can do. I mean, if you're going to try to expose the truth, a lot of people who do that, they've already decided what the truth is, and they're going to make their efforts to make that, to expose that. But I think it's more useful to not decide what the truth is, but aim for it all the time. And even when the truth isn't what you want it to be, to accept that that's the truth and make use of that instead.
Great. Wasn't it just brilliant?
Cool.
Okay, ready for this one here. Now,
Okay.
Bypass the lower vibratory intelligence and engage directly with the source.
Ooh, yeah, I don't know. Zen tends to go away from talking about, vibratory this and that, but I do think there is value to it. There are certain places you can go psychologically and physically. I'm thinking more psychologically that aren't good. That might you might be able to derive a certain amount of fleeting pleasure from them, but they're not really good. I'm not just talking about sex, but there's all sorts of things. And it's useful to know that they're there and to know that those things are part of you, but to indulge in them at any great length is probably not so useful, and ultimately not beneficial. That sort of fleeting instant gratification benefit you might get from it ends up causing more problems than it solves. So
Zen teaches moderation.
Yeah, generally you want to be moderate in everything that you indulge in or that comes your way, and not necessarily forbid anything categorically, so much as if you encounter that thing, you just kind of go, okay, here's where that's going. And maybe, do I want to go there or not? I'm sounding really vague, I suppose. But.
No. Listen, one of the things I heard, and you could speak to this too, is with spiritual activism, and some of the things we're touching on are more of a Zen spiritual activism. People think when you say activism, you grab your torches and you go out to the local, That
is exactly what I think.
I know.
It's people with signs saying, sign this petition.
They're wrong, I'm right.
Yeah.
They're wrong, I'm right. But, but it's a different. That's why the whole point of spiritual activism, like one of the things I heard before was, don't be the rock that goes up against the other rock and tries to smash it, but be the water that goes around it, goes over it, goes under it, goes around it, and over time, it will wear that rock down, right? But... Go ahead. You can say something.
No, I think generally that's a better attitude, because if you kind of go up against things, you create more tension than there needs to be, and I think kind of just letting go and allowing people to have their stuff. The internet is a fascinating place for that, because people will. I don't want to go into detail, but I made the mistake of engaging with someone on Twitter yesterday, and I was amazed at how quickly a whole bunch of strangers, because Twitter is sort of a public thing, jumped in and got very insulting and very nasty, really, really quickly. And I realized, well, I don't really care what these people think, but there's a part of me as a human being, because we're social animals, that does care. Yeah. So I'm watching these bursts of fireworks in my head over these insults and these kind of things that are coming my way, but also going, well, I don't need to respond to that. Or at least I don't need to respond in kind. So I ended up apologizing to a bunch of people. I'm sorry that I upset you. I didn't mean to make you angry. These are my. I
didn't mean to remind you of your mother. So sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to be passive aggressive about it either. But that's what's going on. They're not fighting me. They're fighting some perceived something, which is a conglomerate of all the things they've experienced in their lives, and I just happen to be the punching bag that gets hit for it.
But don't you think, if you're looking at it from that more of a metaphysical or more of a Zen perspective, is that whatever that's kind of upsetting what they say to you is a charge inside you that's not comfortable with it either, and that's what you're recognizing it, and I think that's where the human growth is a potential for always growing. Like we're growing every minute, every day, every nanosecond. We're growing, thinking. We have 70,000 thoughts a day and feelings and emotions, and from that we grow. A lot of it's repetitive and negative, but a lot of that we grow from. So it is, and I can see, and I find myself often where I will just, I'm so upset at something, I just, I block them out, I'm cut out, or whatever it may be, and I'll go back and I'll have to experience it again because I never really looked at it at a deeper level, why I'm charged about it,
Yeah, it's important to realize that if something triggers you, there's probably a reason for it. Sometimes the reason is very simple. It's sort of an animal response, but sometimes it's something that needs addressed, and you don't know until it happens.
Sure. Listen, I can't tell you on a daily basis I want to choke out people, but
you should work on that.
Intellectually.
Well, I'm glad I'm far away.
No, no, I just wanted to throw the few of them at you. Anything on a spiritual activism you want to add to that that you feel is important to know for somebody who's perhaps wants to get more engaged in this reality that we're in and not get distracted by whatever they're getting distracted, and maybe you could define kind of what their purpose is, because a lot of right now we're in a world, I believe, that's shifting from this pretentiousness to authenticity, and people are, life coaches are popping up everywhere. Everybody wants to find their purpose. What's the purpose? What's the purpose? Why am I here? What's my purpose? What's a Zen's purpose? I mean, honestly, do you even have one?
No, I mean you kind of don't. I mean that's why there's no goal. I mean there is a purpose. I feel like there's a purpose, and I feel like there's kind of an ultimate uh, place this is all leading. That's my speculative belief. But I also feel like I am probably not equipped to ever really understand it. So to me, knowing your purpose in life is, I don't know, for me, I suppose it would be knowing that I have a purpose in life, but accepting that I wouldn't understand what that purpose is. Things are going to come my way, and I'm going to have to do something about them. And I want to do the best I can when those things come up. But to sort of decide what my purpose in life is at one moment and stick with that for the rest of my life, I think would be a mistake. You just have to kind of see what you encounter and what needs to be done at any given moment.
Well, you just broke a lot of college majors' hearts out there. They thought
Oh,
they'd be
I'm
doing that
sorry.
they'd be doing that for the rest of their lives. I think people,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, welcome to Zen world, right? But listen, Brad, I know we got to wrap it up here. So, what's on your event schedule? What? Tell us where you go. What do you do? And when you do have these meetings, so people want to find out and check you out because you're brilliant. You're sharing so much wisdom right now in the world. You go to hardcorezen.info. But what do you do? What you call them, seminars? What do you call them?
I have different names for them. I have a center we just established in Los Angeles called Angel City Zen Center that we're trying to make a thing. And every week we have several events that people can go to, and all the links are on that hardcorezen.info blog that I keep. I don't have any immediate plans for travel. I did a whole lot of traveling this year. I know I'm going to Germany again in June, at a couple of places, and I'll probably add some more places before then. But for now, I'm kind of staying in Los Angeles and hoping that a few people might want to come to me instead of me coming to them all the time, because that's exhausting.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, we're thinking we're going to be coming to LA. I have to come down and visit you guys over at
Yeah.
your dojo. What do you do in the meetings, like in Germany? What would you discuss? You have people come and what do you do?
Well, basically, it's the same thing all the time. The Zazen, I instruct people how to do Zazen, and it takes about 5 minutes to learn how to do it, and like 1,000 years to figure out what you've been doing. That's the joke of it.
That's the
It's a
slogan.
very simple. It's a very simple practice to learn. So we sit for a while, and then we'll have a discussion about it. And I try not to lecture people. I mean, if somebody hires me to do a lecture, I can do that, and I think I do a fairly good job. But when I'm doing a more of a Zen event, what I want to do is I want to act as a catalyst to get a conversation happening, and maybe act as a kind of guiding force to make sure that conversation stays in the area we want it to and doesn't get into, people's favorite flavors of potato chips for 28 minutes. You'd be amazed at where these things can go if you leave them open-ended.
So what's the take home? What do people, when they leave your events, what do they take home with them?
I guess you'd have to ask them, but I think I don't know. When I used to go to events that my teacher ran, I always felt better. I mean, I know that's very vague, but you feel deeply refreshed in this kind of way that doesn't exactly make rational sense, but you feel like, you've spent the day basically looking at a wall and keeping still, and you would think that, what is that other than boredom? But you step away from it and go, whoa, that was, that was the nicest thing I've done in a long time. But at the time you're doing it, it might not feel that way. It's kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, no, I could see it. I mean, if you could sit me down for 5 minutes to stare at a wall, I think I could walk out a much healthier, better person too. You know, good luck with
Yeah.
that. Good luck with that. But Brad, listen, thank you for coming on. You are wonderful. Hang on, if you 1 second, if you could, when we wrap this up. But I want to ask you a question off air. But you want to reach Brad Warner, brilliant man. He's around. He's an ordained Zen monk who is a punk rocker at heart. So you know, I mean, come on, you just don't get those combinations like that out there. And he's sharing and caring and spreading the word out there and transforming lives with his Zen philosophy here. You can reach him at hardcorezen.info, hardcorezen.info. Go to Amazon, pick up his books. His books are probably the most cleverest names I've ever heard. In fact, you probably need to name some of our movies and shows you have here. And also, you do movies too. You create movies as well. I forgot to mention that as well.
Yeah. I got a friend who directs indie low budget films, and he always puts me in them. So
it's probably that Godzilla where they're talking, you know, they're off key.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we do that sometimes.
Anyway, Brad, listen, thanks for hanging in and sharing your wisdom and insight today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. We'll see you tomorrow. Is Thursday, right? We got
Tomorrow is
Thursday.
Tomorrow we have Kavari Cornet.
Oh yeah, we're talking about Tesla lights. And
Yeah.
getting into all that.
And you
jazz.
can explain to me why we have a Tesla doll right there.
Oh yeah, I forgot. I was supposed to put him up here. 'Cause
Yeah.
Tesla's my man.
I moved him because he creeped me out.
Oh man, come on, bring him over here. All right, guys, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.